Despite historical reduction in children's blood lead concentrations in Milwaukee, preventing childhood lead poisoning remains a challenge. To understand how the city should address the remaining problem going forward, we need to look back to understand the impact we have had to date. Milwaukee's childhood lead poisoning prevalence is above the national average. Although we've seen a significant reduction, 66% between 2004 and 2016, the number of children being poisoned is still not acceptable. Targeting limited resources to reduce lead poisoning is essential because the cost is greatest on children. The burden is geographically concentrated, and not all sources of lead exposure contribute to poisoning equally. I'll speak of each of these in turn. Although the City of Milwaukee recognizes several high-risk populations, research points to children as bearing the highest cost of lead poisoning. Targeting limited resources is essential because the cost is greatest on children. There are several reasons for this. A small person ingesting lead results in a higher lead level because children have low body weight and absorb lead better. Lead's a neurotoxin that adversely affects brain development. Because children's brains are still developing, a lead level is worse in a kid than in an adult. There's a strong correlation between lead and poor health outcomes in kids. Data show these outcomes affect health over the long term. Worse, not only do they happen over the lifetime, they're irreversible. Because of this, the most effective approach is prevention. Not only is the cost greatest on children, the burden is geographically concentrated. Some districts are impacted much more than others. The map on the next slide shows where the burden of lead poisoning is most concentrated by aldermanic district. Colors on the map are associated with the number of elevated blood lead levels in 2016. There are significant disparities between children poisoned in each of these districts. It's important to recognize all districts in Milwaukee are affected. The areas most impacted by lead poisoning also experience other challenges, although they do have their assets. For example, areas with lowest home values are some of the areas where lead poisoning is generally concentrated. This is also true with poverty level. Not only is the cost of poisoning highest on children and the burden geographically concentrated, but while all sources of environmental lead exposure are important, some contribute to poisoning more than others. National studies show that lead paint is the primary driver, but is that true in Milwaukee? The presence of lead-based paint will not always result in lead poisoning. Just because you have lead paint in a house doesn't mean a child will be poisoned. Houses built before 1978 are most likely to contain lead-based paint. These maps show housing units built before 78 over a 2016 lead poisoning density map. District 7's prevalence is 2.5 times greater than District 14, despite both having nearly 11,000 housing units built before 1978. Similarly, we've also found that the presence of lead service lines may not result in lead poisoning. Just because a lead service line is present doesn't mean that a child will necessarily be poisoned. The maps show lead service lines over the same density map. Even though District 14 has 2,600 more lead service lines than District 15, District 15 has nearly 4 times the prevalence of elevated blood lead levels. This graph shows that EBLs of 5 micrograms per deciliter and greater have dropped from 34.7 in 2004 to 11.6 in 2016. We've never seen this data geographically represented before. The next slide shows EBLs in 2004. In 2004, over 24,000 children received a blood lead test, and 53% of children under the age of 3 received a lead test. Districts 15, 7, 6, 8, and 12 had a significant amount of childhood lead poisoning. This is the same 2004 map with an overlay of dots representing the homes the city has made lead paint safe since 2004. The map shows that the city has primarily worked in areas where there has been a high concentration of elevated blood lead levels. This is the 2016 concentration of EBLs. With prevalence dropping to 11.6%, much of the red in the previous map decreased. Over 24,000 children were still tested, and the penetration level of kids 3 and under increased to almost 65%. So what drove the change? Testing recommendations, major federal legislation, water quality, and treatment practices were all consistent. But the city's primary intervention was around lead-based paint in the highest risk areas. We have a lot of work to do, but our bright spot is that targeting limited resources is effective. None of us are satisfied with the 2016 map, but we should acknowledge the significant progress since 2004 and continue to target limited resources. Thank you.